Today we're not going to need this. Let's just get it out of the way. And get ourselves a little bit better set up. So I figured I'd kind of take the long way around on this little project and actually learn quite a bit in the process. For instance, trying to plane a board on another board isn't exactly going to work out. So the first thing I tried was to basically lodge it in place with some improvised bench log. It worked relatively well. I wanted to use hand tools as much as possible here. Also, while I'm still in the basement for this project, I don't have good access to all of my tools. And this was also very fun. I wanted the pallet boards to be nice and clean, so I took a little bit of extra time to not only do the top and bottom, but also do the sides properly. So I needed 2 pieces for this particular project, and figured I might as well try it with a handsaw as well, to continue with the theme of using hand tools. Once I got my 2 pieces, relatively the same size, I wasn't exactly happy with the quantity of holes here. So I filled it up with glue, and once the glue dried, I sanded it down. And again, I had this piece left over from my handle project, and I wanted to put it to good use. Here I am sanding it down, make sure that it's nice, smooth to the touch, and very nicely usable for what I have in mind. The orbital sander didn't do a super great job with all the details, so I decided to finish this with a little bit of an improvised detail sander. That worked out pretty well. I was happy with it. Making sure also we have a flat surface on the edge here so that there won't be any problems while we glue it up. And here we're all done. Just to get a good understanding of what it would look like if I were to apply a certain finish, I kind of jumped ahead here and put a little bit of water on the piece. And since that popped the grain that I didn't like the texture once again, I sanded it down a second time. That was actually a good thing because then the pallet wood became very smooth to the touch. So that kind of worked out all in my favor. Now, none of the boards that you see here are actually stained. That's the color I got them in. And here's the piece after being sanded a second time. So moving forward, what I needed next was a little bit of a hook. So I figured that working with a bigger piece is a lot easier and it's better to secure it. So I started to carve the shape of the top of the hook, and then simply figured out what's the final shape going to be. So once I had a nice curve in this board, then I broke my own rule and took a power tool and basically cut the piece off. And here was essentially my rough little hook. Took it to an orbital sander to kind of sand it down and finish it off. Remove all the rough edges. That actually also worked out, although I don't really like clamping down power tools upside down like this. You never really know what's going to happen. So now we have our hook, we have our bar, and we have our 2 boards. So first figuring out where I want that big rod to stick into. Gluing it was going to be nice, but probably not enough, so I decided to put one single screw through. And bring it all together. And of course I forgot the glue, so I took it off, put the glue on, and obviously then repeated the process of screwing it back in. After that, I had my little hook. I don't think we needed a screw over here, and it would have been overkill and a little bit complicated to install. So we just used glue for that one. After that came the time to install that secondary board, which was going to be the base. So we put 2 screws through, and a generous amount of glue, because while the screws are great, we don't want the screws to be the only thing holding up that board and keeping everything together. So I kind of used a clamp here to hold the whole stuff together and drove those 2 screws in. So here's a little bit what it looks like in concept. I have my watch, my keys that are being held, but it's still not everything that I want it to be. So I'm taking a random board here, cutting a piece off, and making it at least as straight as possible. That's nice. It's got some good character. It's going to be perfect. So a little bit of sanding, make sure it's nice and smooth to the touch. And that particular board should go right here. Or maybe like that. Well, actually, I'm holding it like this because I want to know what side to remove. I'm going to be removing the outer side, but I'm using the piece to measure where that cut needs to happen. So I'm removing the excess with a circular saw. Of course, removing all the sharp edges. And now we have a board that fits. So applying a generous amount of glue. And that should fit perfect. There was a little bit of an angle at the bottom when I did the cut, so that fit just right. So here it is. Now we're going to let it dry for the night. That's quite a few clamps there, making sure nothing moves. So the next day we take the clamps off. Everything seems to be holding in place, which is really nice. It's also looking pretty good. Maybe a time for some finish. Finishing this early was actually a big mistake of mine. I should have waited a little bit, so you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. Although the finish, you have to admit, gave the wood a really nice color. I really enjoy working with this crystal finish. I find that it just brings out the pallet wood's colors. It just makes it look fantastic. Of course, you could use any type of wood for this project. It's just I use what I had on hand, and this wood didn't cost me a cent, other than the time invested to rip it apart. So I'm making sure that the finish also makes it into all the little nooks and crannies of the project itself. And I'm done with the finish. So it's looking pretty good. We're going to let that dry overnight. But at this point I realized that if I want the thing to hold a cell phone, I'm going to have to make a little stand or a little rest for the phone itself. So here I am kind of figuring out exactly where I want that stand to go. Gluing it up, and installing it on the board and clamping it. Once it dries, I'm going to make my marks so that I can figure out exactly where the wire, the connector, needs to go through. And of course, wanted to make my life very complicated, I decided to do that with hand tools and a little bit of chiseling work. I got a new set of chisel and I wanted to get a feel of how good they are. They're actually not too bad. And here the wire fits perfectly, just wide enough. So I didn't want a wire sticking out from the front, so I decided to drill a hole so I could actually run the wire through. And since I didn't like the sharp hole that drill bit created, I decided to again experiment with a curved chisel and remove a little bit of material to make it look a little bit nicer. It's actually kind of nicer this way. It's looking pretty good. That little notch though of wood doesn't have any finish on it, so I'm going to apply it. So after all is said and done, I generously sand the entire project. The finish I use is water-based, so it has a tendency to raise the grain, which makes the wood feel a little bit rough. So I sand absolutely everything here. And here it is. Project done. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.